I love the water. I love living beside it. I like little lakes and I like bigger lakes. Well, we used to live beside the ocean when we lived in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Whether it's a big lake or whether it's a small lake, I love the water. Well, there was this one time when I tried walking on the water. Let me tell you about it. You see, I was doing some water skiing and I thought what I would do is I would drop my ski and so then I could be skiing on one ski or slaloming. So I signaled to the driver of the boat to make a pass close to the dock so that I could drop my ski so that when I did have to retrieve it, it wasn't too far away. So he made the pass and I dropped my ski and then I was balancing on one leg. It looked rather funny because here I was balancing on the one ski and my foot was sticking right out in front of me. Well, I was doing pretty good until I hit a cross wave. And when I hit a cross wave, I lost my balance and started to fall over. Well, my other ski came off, but for a millisecond, I was walking, well, at least I was trying to walk on the water, maybe so even run, until I fell into the water. Now, here is a word of advice. If you are going to go water skiing and you fall down, let go of the tow rope. I forgot to let go of the tow rope and it was like I almost drank half of the lake, it seemed, until I realized that I could let go and they would come by and they would pick me up. Well, I want to tell you another story about a man who did water walking. Are you ready? I don't know why Jesus chose me. I'm just a little fishing, not a really, it didn't have a big fleet, just my dad and my brother and I were fishing, but Jesus chose me. He chose me. They called me John the Beloved. I just like being with Jesus. I just, when he called me, he said, he gave me this invitation. He says, come follow me. Well, when he said that, there was something about his voice. There was something about his character that just made me want to follow him with all of my heart. And that day, I put down my nets, turned the business back to my dad, and my brother and I, James, and I began to follow Jesus. Well, let me tell you about an invitation that I missed out on. You see, we'd been following Jesus for a little while and we saw him do all kinds of miracles. Well, we saw him raise Jairus' daughter. We saw him when that little lady came and touched the bottom of his clothes and she was made whole. We saw him when he opened the blinded eyes. We saw him do all kinds of miracles. And one day we were along the seashore and Jesus was teaching and people just kept coming and coming and coming. And when they kept coming, like by the end of the day, there were over 5,000 men plus the women and the children. I don't know, could have been 15, 20,000 people that were there. Jesus took this little boy's lunch, 5 pieces of bread and 2 fish, and he fed this huge multitude and there were 12 baskets left over. Well, following Jesus was sometimes pretty tiring. Following Jesus meant that we had to walk the dusty roads, and always there was people around us because of the miracles that Jesus had done. Well, after Jesus had fed the 5,000 people, he said to us, the disciples, he says, look, I'm going to send the people away, and then I'm going to go up in the hills and I'm going to pray for a while. You get in the boat and I'll meet you back on the other side. We really didn't give it a whole lot of thought. I mean, what was Jesus going to do? Walk all the way around the Lake of Galilee, the Sea of Galilee? We just obeyed. So it was getting dark and we pushed off from the shore, and there we were, out in the middle of the lake. And like a lot of times, the wind would come down, and it was just sort of like a wind tunnel. Now we were used to this, but here came this big windstorm. And we were rowing there. We decided not to raise the sail because the wind was too strong. It was contrary to us. It was blowing against us. So the only thing we could do was just row across the lake. And the wind was coming up there, and it got pitch dark. All you could hear was just the wind, and we could feel the waves throwing us up and down, and we rowed. Seems like we would pull 3 rows with our oars, and we'd be pushed back 3. We weren't getting anywhere. We had been struggling for about 6 hours. And it was dark out. Oh, there was a little bit of a moon up there. There was a little bit of the twinkling of the stars. But man, it was a rough sea. It wasn't calm. And the waves were crashing over the front of our boat as we were trying to get to shore. When we finally were out there, tired, beaten, exhausted, all of a sudden we saw this thing. Well, we rubbed our eyes to make sure that we weren't seeing, because it looked like somebody was walking on the water. He'd go up, and then the waves would pitch us into the bottom of the trough, and we couldn't see, and then we'd come back up to the top of the wave again, and there we would be seeing him again. This person walking on the water. We were absolutely terrified because nobody walked on the water, especially in the middle of the night, especially in a windstorm. But this person kept walking. Man, we were hanging on to the boat now, absolutely terrified. I suppose if you could have seen our faces, man, our faces would have been like chalk white. Our eyes would have been as big as saucers. We were terrified. We wanted to scream out, "Ah, what is it?" We all thought it was a ghost walking on the water. Never realized what it was. And as this person came closer, and we were being tossed up and down in the waves as it was coming closer, and the wind was howling around us. All of a sudden, Peter, my friend, he goes, "Hi, hi, hi." He was terrified. Oh, God, he was a strong, burly fisherman, but he was absolutely terrified. He goes, "I think it's Jesus." The rest of us thought, Jesus? How could it be Jesus? We left him back on the shore praying. How could it be Jesus? But as that person came closer and closer and closer, Peter realized, it is Jesus. It is Jesus. We all looked. Jesus wasn't standing on a surfboard like, oh yeah, man. He wasn't like skating across the waves. He was just walking up and down, up and down. And sometimes the waves would be so big that we could just see the top of his head. But as he came closer, Peter called out, "Jesus, if it's really you." And he was absolutely terrified. "Jesus, if it's really you, tell me to come." And then over the sound of the waves, over the sound of the blowing wind, we heard this. "Come! It's me!" Wow. Soon as Peter heard that it was Jesus, he said, "Jesus, I'm coming." He didn't give it any thought. He climbed over the side of the boat and he started to walk towards Jesus. He also was walking on the water. But then, when he realized, he turned around and he looked. He was just a couple of feet away from the boat. But the waves were huge and the wind was blowing his hair and he could feel the mist of the waves. All of a sudden, instead of looking at Jesus and keeping focused, he looked down and he saw the waves, how big they were, and he felt the wind, how strong it was, and he realized that he wasn't in the safety of the boat, and he began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me!" And with that, Jesus came closer, and before Peter went under the water, Jesus reached down and grabbed hold of his hand and pulled Peter back up again. He said, "Peter," Jesus wasn't mad. Jesus wasn't angry. He just said, "Peter, why did you doubt me? Why did you doubt? Why didn't you keep looking at me? Why didn't you keep your focus on me? Instead, you looked at your circumstances, and when you looked at your circumstances, you begin to sink." Well, as soon as Jesus pulled Peter out of the water, they were so close, and both of them walked back to the boat. They didn't swim. They just walked back on the top of the water, got back in the boat, and then Jesus did something really, really awesome. He said, "Peace, be still." The wind stopped. The waves leveled out. And we were all in the boat together. And I thought about that. A lot of people thought, "Oh yeah, Peter never gave it any thought. As soon as he heard Jesus' voice, he climbed out of the boat." But Jesus said to all of us, "Come, it's I. It's me." And even though I was a close friend of Jesus, and even though I saw him do lots of miracles, and I trusted him, and I believed him, I believe he was the Son of God, I believe he was our Messiah, I was willing to preach for him, I was willing to go wherever. But when he gave the invitation to get out of the boat, I didn't do it. I don't know. Maybe I didn't think it was possible for me to walk on the water. Maybe I didn't think I was important enough to walk on the water. Whatever excuse I had, I stayed in the boat. A lot of people said, "Yeah, Peter was just so brash, he never thought." But he was the only one that got out of the boat and walked. I wish, as his friend, as one of the close three, it was Peter, James, and John. James, my brother, and Peter, our friend. We were the closest to Jesus, and yet, when he called, "Come, it's I stayed in the boat." Well, can't go back and recall that night. I can't go back and make sure that night happens again. But you know what? I did some soul searching. I did some thinking. And I want to make sure that whenever Jesus gives me an invitation, that I'm going to respond to him. If he says, "Come, let's have something to eat," I want to be the first at the table. If he says, "Hey, let's go to this village and speak to these people," man, I want to be following close beside him, not ahead of him, not behind him, but I want to be walking close to Jesus, side by side. I want to hear his invitation. I want to respond to him. You know what? Jesus calls you to follow him. He gives you an invitation. You may not have to walk on water, but again, maybe you will. And I'm not talking about when the lake is frozen and you go skating on or sliding on. No. I'm not talking when you're on your boogie board or on your surfboard surfing. No, I'm talking about maybe at some point Jesus will call from outside of the boat and say, come, walk on the water. Well, if that is, you need to obey him. You need to follow that invitation. But you want to make sure that it's Jesus calling you to walk on the water. But it may be other things. He may say, why don't you share your lunch with the person who's homeless? That's an invitation. He may say, well, why don't you invite somebody to your house and have a barbecue with them? And while you're having a barbecue, talk to them about my love. That's an invitation. If he says, when you're in school and the new kid at school seems to be bullied or not being part of the group, Jesus just whispers to you, hey, go talk to him. Go be his friend. That's an invitation. I would encourage you, whatever invitation that Jesus asks you to do, that you would do it immediately and wholeheartedly. Obey your parents. Do the best that you possibly can. Worship the Lord with all of your heart. Those are all invitations. But the greatest invitation is this. Jesus says, would you come and would you follow me? I want to be your Lord. I want to give you eternal life. I want you to be as close as a close friend to me. I want to be your God. Now we have a choice. We can accept the invitation, and if you do, man, it'll be like a huge miracle in your life. Jesus doesn't force us. Jesus doesn't grab us by the neck and says, you've got to follow me. He gave us a free choice. We can choose to follow Jesus. We can choose his invitation, or we can choose not to. We can choose to stay in the boat, or we can choose to get out of the boat. I hope today that you choose the invitation that Jesus has given to you, that you would follow him with all of your heart. You would love him with all of your strength. That you would be known as a person who sticks closer to God, who chooses to follow him. Have a great day today.